So with the introduction of NVIDIA's RTX 3080 and 3090, we have reached a new level of power consumption, of watts, and of power supply requirements to feed these very power-hungry GPUs. Today, I have a god-tier power supply that we're going to talk about, who it's for, why it's so good, and just why this might be the most ultimate power supply we have ever seen. 1500 watts. Let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Thank you once again for joining me. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, hit that notification bell, leave a comment down below. What type of power supply are you planning to use if you're going to be doing the RTX 3000 series? Alright guys, let's get right into it. This is the Be Quiet Dark Power Pro 12 1500 watt power supply. Now, I know that might sound like overkill, but we're going to talk about a few very important things like who's this power supply for, what type of system would utilize this, what are some other benefits you get with such a beefy power supply, and of course, we're going to take a look at it. Comes nicely wrapped like a little high-end gaming PC present. Look at that. Look how awesome that looks. And of course, it's a massive power supply. It even has a large Be Quiet fan in there. Look at that. And while you can't feel it, it feels absolutely like it's like a solid block of gold or something. It feels very, very high quality. I've never touched a power supply that's quite like this. So as soon as Be Quiet sent me this unit for me to review, I received the box. I was really floored at how high quality even the outer box is. All the little details are fantastic. So let's start talking about it. So first, who is a power supply like this for the Dark Power Pro 12 1500 watt? They also make a 1200 watt if you want to step it down a little bit. Well, this is going to be for somebody. First, it's probably a workstation because let's be honest, even in gaming, as SLI isn't as big of a deal anymore, 1500 watts is definitely absolutely overkill. But let's say if you're running a workstation with multiple GPUs, even if you take something as simple as DaVinci Resolve, you can stack multiple GPUs and very quickly, especially if you overclock them a little bit, they can run really, really power hungry. You'd be surprised at how much power you actually need. 1000 watts wouldn't even begin to cut it. So then 1500 watts actually seems pretty reasonable. There have even been some reports of a single 3080 drawing as much as 500 watts when it's nicely overclocked. So you can imagine if you throw a couple of those in there, along with all of the other components that you would have in your system, how quickly that can add up. So 1500 watts for a high-end system actually doesn't seem that far-fetched. And of course, to be able to run at the utmost peak efficiency, you want as much overhead as possible. You don't want to get a 1000 watt power supply and be running constantly at 950 watts. Even if you don't necessarily top off that high, just having much more overhead, it's just going to make your power supply run in a much better and more efficient manner. Most likely the fan's not going to have to spin up that much, especially with a power supply that's this large. That's one of the huge benefits of having a large casing like this. This is not a mini ITX power supply, and you can fit a large full-size fan in there. The larger the fan, the quieter it's going to spin, the more air it's going to push. So that means when you're doing a lot of rendering, that's going to come in very handy. I can't tell you guys how many times in a very high-end system like a water-cooled system where if my power supply was inadequate, how many times that's the loudest thing that I heard in my system. It actually happened quite a bit, not only for the efficiency and safety of the components, but also for the noise. The more headroom you have, the less the power supply is going to be stressed and the fan just isn't going to spin as much. Now, this is going to be a patented frameless funnel design fan, so they definitely put in a considerable amount of work, design, and engineering thought into the fan. The second user that I would say that this power supply is for, that's going to be really the overclocker, the enthusiast, somebody who really likes to tinker with their system. Maybe they're doing like liquid nitrogen or something like that on their components. Maybe they're also running multiple GPUs in order to get high scores and world records on benchmarks. If you're doing something like that, you're going to need not only a power supply with this much wattage, as we said before, these new 30 series GPUs can eat a serious amount of power, Not to mention the high-end CPUs, when they get overclocked really crazy, they gobble up power like crazy as well. So the high-end overclocker, the enthusiast, the person who's really going to actually be pushing this system to the max, he's going to need something like this, not only for the consistent, reliable 1500 watts, but also because of the quality of the components, the quality of the overclocking capabilities of a power supply like this. It's going to give you really efficient and clean power, titanium level power. It's going to add to the stability and the performance of that overclocker's work. As we saw recently with some possible issues with the RTX 3080 GPUs, with the capacitors maybe having some noisy power interference, which eventually got fixed by drivers and things of that nature. And of course, the third person that this power supply is for, that's just going to be maybe for the gamer or the computer enthusiast that, all right, it's not a workstation, it's not really going to overclock too much, but they just want the absolute best component for their system. Maybe they're running like a huge dual loop system and like a K-Slabs build with a high-end Threadripper or an Intel 18 core processor. Maybe they just have a very high-end system. They appreciate the quality that goes behind high-end components, in the aesthetics, in the care, detail to the attention, in the performance, even though they may not use the performance like a workstation user or an overclocker may. They like knowing that that performance is there in case in the future they ever want to go any of those two routes. So this power supply will have that in spades, not to mention the absolute high-end quality that is the unboxing experience. It seems like something that you would get like an expensive watch or something like that. The entire unboxing experience is absolutely immaculate. That shows you that they really put thought into every single detail. It's almost like unboxing maybe an Apple product or something like that. Of course, it's going to be more expensive than typical 850 or 1000 watt power supplies. Definitely get a lot for your money, so it's 100% worth it, not only for the actual performance, but with everything together. Of course, this is a modular power supply. Not only that, and something that's super awesome, you get very nice cables. Almost looks like custom cables with this power supply. That means that even in a high-end system, I would have no trouble sticking these cables in the system without having to get custom cables. Now, the Be Quiet Dark Power Pro 12 1500 watt power supply is what they term a digital power supply, as opposed to something that's analog. Now, basically what being digital means, it's just a way that it's converting the power from the wall through the power supply, through your components. This is actually a very complex procedure, and one of the main reasons why you need a high quality power supply that's very efficient. And being digital just means it can do this a lot cleaner, going through something like your GPU, which can have various spikes in power. As you know, the RTX 3080, 3090 are ridiculously powerful with a lot of power draw coming from these GPUs. That means that it's going to be putting a lot more stress on the power supply, causing them to age considerably faster. A more efficient power supply, as it digitally sort of transcribes all of that power, it's going to be a lot easier and more efficient of a curve. That way, not only is the power that you're feeding your components going to be considerably better, cleaner, more efficient, it's also going to dictate the lifespan of these components, and that's going to be considerably longer just because they've had a lot better power run through them, as opposed to being more exposed to inefficient power spikes and things of that nature, which can definitely damage components over time. You have microcontrollers, which basically is controlling that signal, as we mentioned, from the wall to the power supply to your components. It's just a considerably better process. It's just so much healthier for your components, especially in a high-end system. And now it makes sense why a high-end user in a workstation in a very mission-critical environment would choose to work with a power supply like this. It just has a much higher probability and work rate at giving much more efficient, clean, and reliable power. And of course, to go with all that, this power supply has an 80+ titanium rating. Now, usually you may see platinum or you may see gold. So titanium really is the top of the food chart here. And once again, that's going to speak to the efficiency of the power supply over the entire range of the load that's put on the power supply. That's actually very important. That means that it's going to have consistent, efficient power all the way through. That avoids spikes and different issues that can crop into your power supply. And of course, All this relates to your expensive components. The more complex and expensive component is, like an RTX 3090 or even like a Threadripper CPU or an Intel 18-core 10980XE, these are all very power-hungry, complex components, so they really need nice clean power, especially if you're overclocking them and you're dealing with voltages and things of that nature. Also comes with an overclocking key. For overclockers, I think you're going to know what this is. It basically lets you switch between a single rail and a multi-rail system. That way you have a lot more flexibility in your overclocking, and that kind of shows you the type of user that this power supply is going to be targeted at. Overclockers will make great use of this, and Be Quiet absolutely knows that by including this as well. So to summarize, this is really one of the ultimate god tier power supplies. Be Quiet Dark Power Pro 12. Definitely pretty impressive, even down to this aluminum housing. Like I mentioned, the build quality is fantastic. And then when you start to get into the actual details of the power supply, each detail is more impressive than the last. And even though power supplies aren't as attractive as, let's say, a 3090 GPU where everybody goes crazy for, it's actually even more important because you can't run that 3090 or 3080 without something like this. Plus the aluminum just feels so good, nice and cool to the touch. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions down below. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.